The story of Noah's Ark is one of the most beloved Old Testament tales. Noah built that ark for a long time, then there was the Great Flood and all the animals boarded 2 by 2 and so on. But what's the real story of the ark? Here's the untold truth of Noah's Ark. One of the most famous supposedly Noah's Ark sites is the admittedly very boat-looking Duripinar site in Turkey. According to Atlas Obscura, the site was exposed in the late 1940s after a series of earthquakes and storms. What's odd about this place is how long it has persisted as the remnants of Noah's Ark when it was excluded as a possible resting place for the famed ship during the first initial investigation in 1960. No evidence has been found that there is any ship there, nor has any actual petrified wood been located there, with the exception of a few fragments that probably arrived in a mudslide. The boat-shaped formation is actually just rock and hardened mud. It appears boat-like, but contains no evidence of the timbers or iron fastenings that would have been used in a large boat's construction. Oh, and all that petrified animal poop on the site really doesn't prove anything either because of the whole animals have been roaming the world for millions of years problem. In 2010, a group of evangelical Christian explorers announced they'd located the remains of Noah's Ark near the summit of Mount Ararat in Turkey. According to National Geographic, the team says they found a structure comprised of 7 large wooden compartments. When they radiocarbon dated the wood, they determined it was roughly 4,800 years old, which is precisely in the right range to correspond with the biblical Noah story. Not everyone thinks that really proves anything, though, even if it's true. NBC News says the structure is more likely to be an ancient shelter than a giant boat. And it's also a problem when someone goes into that kind of expedition without an innate sense of skepticism. Stony Brook University archaeologist Paul Zemansky put it like this: "I don't know of any expedition that ever went looking for the Ark and didn't find it." Tales of catastrophic floods are not just limited to what we've read in the Old Testament. As it turns out, there are a lot of very old stories about horrific floods, and some archaeologists and geologists believe the stories might be based on things that really happened, however embellished they may have become over the years. According to ABC, one such theory was put forward by 2 scientists at Columbia University who believe the Black Sea was once a freshwater lake that became inundated by rising seawater from the Mediterranean. In 1999, the theory attracted the attention of underwater explorer Robert Ballard, who you might remember from such historic discoveries as the wrecks of the Titanic and the Bismarck. Ballard's team found evidence of an ancient shoreline 400 feet below the surface and determined through radiocarbon dating that the area was likely flooded during the time of the biblical Noah. Ballard claimed to have also found structures in the area, but we really haven't heard much about the expedition since those first reports came out 20 years ago. These days, Ballard seems more focused on mapping the seafloor on the opposite side of the planet. In 1872, an Englishman named George Smith discovered a cuneiform tablet that told a familiar story about a guy in a boat and a humanity-killing flood. According to the New Yorker, all the specifics were there too, including the mountaintop the ship eventually landed on and the whole dove incident. There are some differences though. In the Mesopotamian version, it wasn't one god, but the ancient Mesopotamian gods and goddesses who flooded the entire world and everyone in it. Also, the gods didn't decide to wipe out all of humanity because it had become all corrupt and unsalvageable, but mostly just because humans were vaguely annoying. So here's a tip: don't do things that gods find annoying. Another thing the cuneiform tablets had in common with the Noah story is the building instructions. Although the ark itself isn't constructed in the same way in each story, there are enough details and measurements provided that someone should be able to use them to construct their own vessel, just in case. A lot of the debate about Noah's Ark has to do with the amount of weight a ship that size could have actually supported. Obviously, it would have sucked if Noah had spent all that time building a ship and loading it up with animals, and then it had sunk anyway because there were too many dang animals on board. According to The Telegraph, in 2014, a group of master students at Leicester University decided to settle the question. They used the biblical measurements to calculate the size of the ark, then they used the density of the water to figure buoyancy, and from there determined how much weight the ship could endure before sinking. Their conclusion? Noah could have put 70,000 animals on board and the ship would have floated.
And what do you know? It floats!
That was my plan all along.
There are issues with their conclusion, though. For example, the measurements figured on Noah's boat being so heavy that the water level would stop just below the top of the ship, which means it would have been pretty vulnerable to waves, especially the sort of waves that were happening as the storm raged on for 40 days and 40 nights. And the study did not calculate things like the physical size of each creature, only its weight. But it did prove one of the larger questions about the feasibility of such a voyage, so hooray! One problem that the Noah's Ark story seems to avoid is the whole issue of genetics. When Noah and his family got off the ark, their only Tinder options would have been, well, Noah and his family. It's not just long-held social taboos and the overall ick factor that warns us against inbreeding. It's been scientifically proven to be a super bad thing. Even with 8 people as a base, the gene pool would be too small to make world repopulation feasible.
Okay, on the count of 3, say what level of cousins we would have to be for this to be okay. 1, 2, 3.
5.
Unacceptable no matter what.
This is never gonna work.
According to the BBC, you can look at history for an example of why inbreeding is bad. Charles II of Spain was so disabled he didn't learn to walk until the age of 8. And that's because of all the inbreeding in his extended background. The number of identical inherited genes he got from both parents was higher than if his parents had been brother and sister with a normal tree before that. So that explains a lot about Joffrey Baratheon.
I am the king!
And it makes you wonder how the current human population could have waded out of such a dangerously shallow gene pool. The Bible gave very specific measurements for Noah's Ark, which not only provided early readers with a solid set of details in an otherwise implausible story, but also paved the way for giant replicas of Noah's Ark at theme parks and tourist attractions. In 2012, a life-sized replica of the Ark opened in the Netherlands and has been welcoming 3,000 paying customers a day ever since. According to Today, the replica took 3 years to build and cost more than $1 million. And then Kentucky just couldn't resist getting on the bandwagon, and in 2016, a life-sized replica of Noah's Ark called Ark Encounter opened in Williamstown. Inside the Ark are exhibits that include, among other things, cages filled with dinosaurs. So if you're a science person, you might want to give that one a pass. So there's this whole little thing called science that sort of gets in the way of the Noah's Ark legend, and science is pretty sure that evidence for a catastrophic worldwide flood just doesn't exist in the geologic record. According to the Skeptical Inquirer, you can find evidence of drying in some parts of the world that correspond precisely to the time the Earth was supposedly completely covered with water. There are other examples too. The dunes and other desert deposits that exist in various places on the planet would not be there if the world had been inundated by water. And if there had really been a flood that covered the entire world, most of the sedimentary rock on Earth would lie at the bottom of the ocean. But the continents are covered with sedimentary rock, which contradicts what we would expect if there were a flood 5,000 years ago. And that's just geology. Archaeology causes even more problems, especially when you look at Turkey, where the Ark supposedly came to rest as the floodwaters were receding. Stony Brook University archaeologist Paul Zemansky explained, "We know what's going on with Turkey archaeologically at that time, and there's no major interruption in the culture. Dangerous hobbies aren't really anything new. Lots of people climb mountains without safety gear, jump off cliffs wearing wingsuits, and participate in sports as nonsensical as extreme ironing. But when you combine dangerous hobbies with dangerous obsessions and a desire for discovery-related fame, well, that can be fatal." Over the years, a lot of people have become obsessed with the idea of finding Noah's Ark. Most of them have teamed up into proper organized expeditions, which tend to be safer than traipsing off into the wilderness alone. But some people, like Donald Mackenzie, set off alone in search of the Ark. Unfortunately, Mackenzie's obsession ultimately led to his disappearance and presumed death. On his way to see the site located earlier in 2010, he got caught in an early blizzard and disappeared. So maybe there was enough room for all those animals, and maybe the Ark could support all that weight, and maybe it somehow miraculously didn't get inundated by stormwaters. But if it really did float for 7 months, how was there enough room on board for all the food necessary to sustain all those animals, and how did 8 people manage to do the job of caring for them all?
So I really have to be amongst these beasts?
Yes, sir.
All right. You don't have to hit them or nothing?
No, don't ever hit them.
Okay.
Anyone who's ever worked at a zoo can tell you that housing a bunch of animals in small spaces isn't just about throwing food at them and shoveling tons of poop overboard. According to the National Center for Science Education, each cage has to be specifically designed to meet the needs of each individual species, from the height of food and watering troughs to the diameter of the bird's perches. As the story goes, Noah found land with the help of a dove, who returned to the Ark carrying an olive branch, proof that the floodwaters were finally receding. But according to the Skeptical Inquirer, water and trees don't exactly mix.
I got it! Oh my god, the tree's in the water! I gotta get it! I gotta get it! I gotta go!
In the biblical tale, the Ark floated for 5 months before it came to rest at the top of Mount Ararat. But a 2016 study found that an olive tree submerged in water for just 3 months died. Another experiment showed that submerged grass died after just a month underwater. That would have left the herbivores with nothing to eat after disembarking. And Noah's vineyard, which he planted shortly after the flood, would also not have survived because the soil would have become too saturated with salty seawater. Everything would have been salty.
Salt. Cracked black pepper.
And that's just the botany part of the equation. What would happen if you released thousands of herbivores and thousands of predators back into the same environment? You'd end up with a lot fewer than the 2 of each herbivore unless you gave them a head start of a decade or 2. Anyone who has seen Waterworld knows that when the polar ice caps melt, the world will be covered by oceans, and everyone will live on implausible-looking boats and spend all their time searching for the mythical dry land and drinking their own pee. A Waterworld-like scenario would never actually happen, though, because there literally is not enough water on Earth to cover the entire world. According to the American Museum of Natural History, if all the ice on Earth melted, sea levels would rise about 230 feet, which would mean the end of most coastal cities, but would stop far short of actually covering the entire planet. So if there really was a worldwide global flood, all that water not only receded, but somehow also left Earth altogether. But really, that's probably the least of the story's problems. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more Grunge videos about your favorite Bible stories are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.